What's a pirate's favorite letter? You'd think so, but their first love is the sea. Always have one in your back pocket, ready? There it is. Okay, so don't start running for the exits at this point. Yes, you are hearing programmatic Western art music at the same time as me talking about something. So give me at least a couple minutes before you start running towards it. But wait, what? What could Ottorino Respighi's Pines of Rome have in common with, if you've looked at the schedule, user testing, research facilities? Well, give me a little bit of time to sort of pitch you on what it might have. But the big goal today is, and again, thanks, Mad Pal. Last year was great, and this year's been great also, to be welcoming with something like an experimental format like this. So, having said that, so that rascal on the right side of the screen, he's just the sort of person that would do something like this to you. But again, we're either going to have fun together and talking about research facilities, or I also got scheduled late and close to the cocktail hours, so in any event, it's going to be fodder for that if I fall on my face. I'm a pivoter. And that's something you need to know about me to know why. Okay, so pivoting from what? I'm pivoting from 7 years of music education. So you see in the upper left-hand corner, me meeting my middle school band director, and as oftentimes teachers do, that person influenced me to understand the gift to be able to give back to students in that way. So I spent 7 years in music education. You can see a very self-satisfied ultimate high school band nerd there on the right. And that transitions through a bachelor's and master's in music education to, some really serious contemplative leading of classical art music on my part. But to understand how that connects, how my path prepped me well, my master's program and 1 year of PhD, I really met the best in music education in terms of observational research technique. Even looking back into the 70s, if you want to base good technique in teaching in research, there's quite a breadth of really good work in that area to understanding the psychology behind interactions between students and learners and et cetera. So I was fortunate to have that path. I mean, it really went so far as to the glasses up there on the right. I tried to find a picture of this, but literally in the 70s, an observer researcher in classrooms would wear those glasses. I call them bus driver glasses because they black out, someone else's view of your eyes. And so the idea back in the 70s was if you would wear those, students wouldn't be freaked out by a random person in the room. That sounds really effective, right? The random person wearing giant black glasses. But also to the extent, I was also that nerd who started saying things like, my height is one standard deviation above the mean relative to, so I'm just trying to impress upon you that yes, research was a big part of my life, and music was a big part of my life. So when it came time to pivot, I really was able to sort of honestly ask myself, where are my strengths? Where do they lie? The scientific process. I was also a gadget freak, which will come in handy later in this presentation. And the ability to empathize and experience design was like, wow, this seems like a pretty good opportunity, a pretty good thing to move into. So that's a little bit about why me and why there's some music you might be hearing at times. But then why user testing and why a research facility? Why am I the one talking with you about this? My first several years when I pivoted were in consulting services, specifically with PwC, what was PwC public sector at the time, helping them stand up a digital practice. But a little over 2 years ago, I was fortunate to move over to Fannie Mae, where Fannie Mae was undergoing a transition of creating its first in-house capital D design team. And we started with just a few FTEs and lots of consulting teams helping. And today we're at probably about 70 or 80 designers in-house over a 2-year process. So it's been a great learning experience and a great transition. And in that time, I had the good fortune of helping us stand up our first user testing lab. We've also been consolidating major office areas. We just opened a huge new office in downtown DC that are consolidating like 5 old offices. We're doing the same in Northern Virginia in a couple of years, and we've just completed that in Plano, Texas also. So getting in on the ground floor and being able to influence this has been a great opportunity and great for me to share with you. That's a picture of my particular slice team there on the left. I have to call them out. The capital markets design team, 13 people who are dynamically striving to try to meet the different challenges and goals of housing. So one person's mouth is totally obscured there. Sorry, Kia. Anyway, So we've had this opportunity, it started mid-year 2017, maybe late spring, and we actually launched our first lab in January of this year. So just to give you a concept of why we're talking about lab, why we're talking about this. The music didn't line up exactly what I wanted to, so I'm just going to keep rolling, okay? This is a great part, though. You have heard my intro, and you've heard the first movement of Pints of Rome by now. So anyway. Different portions of what we want to talk about, stages of development. And this is by no means meant to be an exhaustive list. It's just a good checklist for if you're going to go through this process, you do want to at least have thought through these areas, okay? If you can have early contact with the architects who are going to be either renovating or physically creating the space, earlier the better. Right now, I'm in contact with the architects who are going to be building our new Northern Virginia office structure, but even just for the renovation project that was our first lab, trying to get on the same page in terms of definitions and ideas. If you don't start that relationship early, you're going to be paying for it later on through the process. So try to come together and talk through and hash through big concepts and big ideas with the architects that are going to be involved. If you have the opportunity, people are going to be more than willing to show you their labs in your market or traveling to other markets. In the DC market specifically, I would call out Media Barn, which is a consulting service that has a nice setup in Arlington, Virginia. Wherever your market is, take the opportunity to go and visit places, to talk with them about how, what works best and what hasn't worked for them. And actually physically be in those spaces. Ultimately, best case is if you can actually see capture occurring, like research occurring in the space, and see how it functions or doesn't function for them. But even just physically being present to be able to scout and get ideas about what might work or what might not work for you is a great idea. There are some general design concepts that you're going to have to consider across the board. The upper image is sort of like the standard 3 set. Do you have an observation room that connects to a larger method area, and then do you have a smaller single testing room? There's plenty of different configurations that we could go wild all day talking about just that concept, but that's sort of a starting point for you to consider. And here are some of the topics that we're going to talk about moving into that. Multi-purpose use of the room. I want to suggest this because getting buy-in, depending upon if someone's coming to you and saying we're going to do it, or if you're trying to advocate for it, you're going to need to have a business justification for that use of space. And suggesting multi-use may sound like, oh no, this is supposed to be a lab. I don't want it to be a conference room. But if you unless you're really hot and you're doing capture every day, 8 hours a day in that room, there is something to be said for, we don't want to just be using the room twice a month for capture and it's just sitting there the rest of the time. That's not going to be an acceptable premise from a business justification of the space and expense. So I would suggest going into the whole project with the idea this is also going to be used for video teleconference or executive conference. If you can build around that, then you're going to have a better justification for the space and cost. Synchronous use, what we're talking about here is whoever your stakeholders are, you need to come to an agreement with regards to, think about that 3-room setup. If it's possible for us to be having a customer visit or an execution session in our large method area, but then in the connected study room across the glass have something else happening, you may want to allow that or you may not want to allow that. Let's say we're having someone come in and you're just doing a brainstorming session with an external customer in the large method room, but nobody's actually observing in the study room, connected study room. The first time you think it's okay to be having a secondary meeting and then some VP in the other room comes in and goes, don't you know there's an external customer next door? We can see you. You're moving around. Be on the same page with regards to that beforehand rather than having, jumped into it and now being totally diverse and upsetting potentially an important stakeholder. Welcome path and staging area. The idea here is you need to it's an opportunity for whoever you're bringing into this capture area to begin to understand what your culture is and what's important to you. So the path physically that someone is walking into as they go in to become a participant, make sure that that's reflective of what you want it to be. It also should be calming, putting them at ease, giving them needs that they may have for their participation that day, especially with regards to a staging area. So if you're going to have participant after participant on same days, if you don't think about it carefully, it's going to end up feeling like a DMV, and usually that's not a very positive, emotional, connective situation. So what is that? How are you building the space to be proactively supportive of those participants that you're going to be working with? Observational space there's an assumption I'm making here that in your whatever you create, you're going to have a one-way mirror between the study room and an observation room. You may not. Maybe there won't be a one-way mirror and it'll be video, like just networked video or cabled video. In either case, this new round of architects that I'm working with right now, they came to me and they're like, I don't know, does this really match our corporate culture right now? And I get what they're saying. It for people who have no concept of a testing space, they might be a little, whoa, you're sitting behind one-way mirror? But for me, that's kind of a non-starter. Like, that's what this is meant to do. So I'm raising it to everybody to say, don't be surprised if in the beginning of this process, someone comes up and questions that core design aspect of what you're doing and says, is there any way we can achieve this without the feeling of not being present in the observation? Or so just make sure you have a response for this that's better than mine, which is, no, that's what an observation room is, sort of thing. Okay, more tactful than that. Single end testing space. This goes back to if the core design is a study room, an observation room, the recommendation is also to have, if you're going to just do one-off, like one participant usability tests or whatever method might just be with one participant, you might think that that's going to work well in a room that could also be a focus group room until you start to try to do it the first time, and it's just like, one leader and one participant in a space like this. It doesn't really work very well without much modification. So if you're going to have a lot of that one end execution, whether it's usability testing or whatever, I would highly suggest you try to plan for a space that would be better for that small population. Next stage, early construction. What are the things that we end up considering there? Physical inspection. I don't know if it hit you, but that's the image that I'm trying to get you to say, like, eyes are bigger than stomach or the other way around. The concept here is you may have planned for how to deck out a certain space, and then when you actually physically are in it for the first time in mid-construction, you go, I don't think those chairs are actually going to fit the space that I thought was going to be here. Or maybe it's not such a great idea to have 40 tables in this space. It's not as big as I thought it was. So make sure that as soon as you can get into the space to check to see if what your early physical plans were actually make sense. Wiring. Two anecdotes about this. If you end up with an observation room and a study room, you're going to want some sort of wiring pass through between the two rooms. And this is another one of those things where I've talked to teams. The architects and the planners would be like, well, what? I don't know if they want the rooms to be like soundproof or something. They don't want to think that there actually needs to be just some holes that actually open between the two rooms that I can wire things through. It was a resistant point for them. But if you're going to have that sort of setup, make sure that you allow yourself that flexibility. So I'm just talking about, large diameter holes to run lots of different potential cabling types that we'll talk about in a moment through. Also just drop boxes for power. And if you usually don't know that power drops are an issue until you've been in a room where power drops are an issue, and then it's just a nightmare, right? So try to be thoughtful about how you're going to wire everything that you might have as a need there. Curveballs. The best thing here is to say that there are some things that you just can't plan out for. I will tell you that one of them for us was a renovation for our structure, and what we planned as one single pane of one-way glass became like 6 strips that each had maybe a 2-inch metal divider between each strip. And so the first time I saw it, I was like, I don't know, like if you're standing here, my vision's obstructed. But then when I literally talked to the rest of the people, again, it was a renovation project and it was on the 4th floor of a large office building. And they went, how else were we going to get a single pane of one-way glass to the 4th floor besides craning it up to the side of the building, taking the glass out of the building and moving it in? And I went, okay, that's a good point. So there's going to be something like that you don't plan for. Be flexible in dealing with it. Moving in the next portion, the other thing, if I haven't imposed this or presented this about myself, kind of a gadget freak. So I'm that person who wants to know what different possibilities of tools are available and is it now better than what was previously the best available. No, really, I am a gadget freak. Like in my first couple of months, an outside project of mine that wasn't what I was supposed to be focusing on at all was, hey, we can have a mobile usability testing kit that has biometrics. I mean, we're talking, eye tracking, facial pattern recognition, and galvanic skin response. I'll get it in a box this small. It'll be less than $2,000. It'll be great. So that helps for me to be talking to you about this. But I do want to throw in something. Be considerate of if it's applicable to your scenario. Because, yeah, I did that thing. I created it it wasn't sub 2,000 with eye tracking at the time. Might have been sub 6,000. But I made a small testing kit that would output something like this with eye tracking and facial pattern recognition and galvanic skin response. And the first time I showed it to some of our leaders at that time, they were like, you'd be lucky if you get a camera to like interview an investor customer or something like that. Most of them won't even allow you to audio record the actual interaction or the capture. So I went, oh, this would be really cool. So I'm saying, in speccing out the equipment, which is the next section we're going to go to, it is good to have a gadget person, but also make sure that you rein them in terms of what their expectations for usage are. Here's the gadget section, but I just want to throw out there, how are you going to move stuff around? Have a plan for that. Pelican or OtterBox cases, the industry standard for moving large equipment. Just make sure that you know how you want to move things from point A to point B and how you're going to have them secured. So communication. So in the room itself, especially if we're going to do multi-use purpose, you're going to need some sort of Cisco-based system, a WebEx system, something that allows the room to communicate with other rooms accurately, okay? I'm trying to think about where I'm at time-wise relative to, so you're going to have collaboration, hardware and software. So here's just some vendors, whether it's Mural or Real-Time Board from a collaborative web app perspective, whether you want to take a look at Smart IQ boards or Surface Hub for Microsoft. There's lots of options here. If you don't come in with an opinion here and you have an AV tech group sort of direct you, you're going to miss out on a lot of these opportunities because they're going to focus more on the communication aspect and just make very large screens that work with Cisco systems. So make sure that you consider what you might want to be doing from this perspective. Video capture, standard for a long time has been network video cameras, but I want to raise to you here that DSLRs, from a cost perspective and a use perspective, have become very attractive. If you're going to have any sort of visual storytelling team that's going to want photography equipment also, this is a 2-for-1 sort of scenario. You can find lots of equipment that'll work great for stills and great for video. Only other thing I will reference and bring up to your attention here is cabling type. Probably everybody in here is familiar with an HDMI cable. But when you're trying to scope for longer distances of runs for capturing these sorts of activities, you need to be familiar with things like SDI cables. Just the difference between moving from one format to another there can get you 100 feet without the need for lots of other booster types and other equipment types. Audio. Again, this is all very high level, and I'm not trying to hit everything absolutely, but things you should think about. The main audio thing I want to say to you is you may think you could get away without miking the space. You can't. You're going to need to mic the space. Probably make sure you have a wireless and wired component. So just make sure that you don't forget this aspect of what you're doing. That was the end of the fourth movement, by the way, so I'm a little bit over, so I'm going to try to keep moving here. Scene switching, if you're going to make high-quality artifacts out of it with like lower thirds or, scripting on the screen, if you want to put slides on the screen or anything like what I showed you earlier that I said we had a usability testing, you're going to need something that is enabling bringing those components together. You could do it in post, which frankly is the next thing. You could do it with editing software, but if you do it with what I showed you previously, you're going to save your time in editing. You're still going to need editing software, which I show here, leading Adobe products or leading Apple products, Premiere Pro or Final Cut X. They're both excellent. They may be options for your enterprise in terms of what tech is already adopted could be influencing this choice, or whoever you're going to have doing this work. If you have the flexibility to see what their preferences are, that's probably best case scenario. Also, don't forget compression of video from an artifacting perspective. If you're going to be creating video artifacts out of the capture of these sessions, you're going to need to compress them after you've made their final versions, or the next thing, which is archiving, is going to be totally untenable. Archiving it also, make sure you have some plan here for where everything's going to be stored. A lot of enterprise spaces are going to have some option for you, like OneDrive probably available, but really test out whether that's going to be a functional solution for you or not. Dropping prices of SD cards and solid state media in general are making those very attractive. And I would just do a +1 for redundancy of capture. So like if you do end up using DSLRs, maybe you do the raw capture on an SD card and you do the capture of the actual output of the program so that you have both in case something fails later on. Analysis software. You don't have to use specific software to do quantitative or otherwise behavioral analysis. You can certainly do it all on your own with free materials. Noldus does make an excellent product, the Observer XT product, I believe. But I will also throw a plug. There are some great products. There's a product called Scribe 4 with the University of Texas. I believe the professor is Bob Duke. This is in one of those music ed things coming back out again. It's an excellent free or nearly free product that will help you code, essentially, observational research. And burning through the very last parts. Once it's there, what do you have to consider? Make sure that you actually have a launch event scheduled, something to actually say, we now have this core capability that we didn't have before, and let's talk about it, so that people are aware of it. Relative to that, it means that you have to have more people than just yourself know how to use whatever your setup is. So that's going to remain a constraint until you've been able to train up other people to use whatever you have created as a setup. Aids for that launch. So here's our video conferencing area. Here's our editing bay. Here is our observational capture. Here's our one-person usability testing den. Things like that are going to not only for launch itself, but over long term, where someone's sneaking in. Well, what is this room? I've heard it's magic. What happens in here? Just having things like this that are static and available for people will help them understand what the capability you've delivered is. Usage aids themselves, again, this is a checklist thing, but believe me, it's going to be worth it. If you don't have things like this, here's my story. All our screens are still RF controlled, like they had remote controls, but we locked all the remote controls away. And I don't think people are like walking around with those RF control watches. But every week, for the first several weeks, somehow people were like changing the settings on these devices when there were no physical buttons for them to change it. I had no idea how that was even happening. So one of the ways we curtailed it, I still don't really know how it was happening, was to say, don't do these things, do these things. And it helped. So how are people supposed to use, and how are people going to get themselves in trouble by using the room? It will help you. Reset and cleaning. What do I want to say here? Not everyone lives by the Boy Scouts code or whatever of leave a space better than you came to it with, and we were no exception. Like weeks in, we thought, oh my gosh, who's using this space? And then we realized, oh, it's us. And we're doing a horrible job of taking care of it. So have a plan in place. Also, just from a security perspective, I mean, Fannie Mae was having in customer visits, so we're having Wells, Citi, large lenders in and sharing strategic information, and then potentially the next day having a different group in and potentially leaving things up from the first group. I mean, imagine from a customer relations standpoint what a drop that is. Forget about is the floor clean. Let's make sure that anything that we're sharing with our partners is taken care of and protected, right? And then finally, last two, physical scheduling of the room. If you have an advanced system for scheduling that are outside of conference rooms in general, it's great to be able to make use of that. If you don't, there are some options. This image in the upper left-hand corner is from a company that's branding their products Joan boards, but it's also, I believe, their parent company is called Visionect, and they're just they have e-ink capabilities that they're then partnering with like a Wi-Fi network, and basically you can just put that up on a wall or on glass with a magnet and have a scheduler that you don't have to charge once maybe 6 months that works just for that single one-off space. That will help you. And then secondly, how are you going to actually have people schedule the space themselves? Again, you might have an enterprise network capability already built in. It might be linked to your Outlook or whatever the calendar or scheduling system that you use is. If you don't, just a shout out for Schedule Once. There are lots of other options out there. We just use this because it allowed the treatment of a room as a single space. So we actually would break it across 3 rooms. And if a space was showing as available to be scheduled, it's available. If it doesn't show as available during that time that you're asking for, it's not available. Lots of different options, but again, something that you'd want to have a strategy for going in. So I hope that I haven't gone too far over. Are there any questions that were thrown?
Yeah. Yeah, we got quite a few questions, so definitely, hopefully, Jay, if you're around for the cocktail hour, we can get some more of those. I'm going to go with the top-ranked one here. What was the one thing in the lab that was totally worth the money?
There's a lot of them. Yeah, the first thing that's coming to my mind is the scene. It's the one that we have is called a Blackmagic ATM. It's basically a scene producing device. It's the thing that I was showing you to say, if you're going to create things that need lower thirds, you're going to superimpose video on top of itself. If you have the device we used was less than $1,000, but if you don't do it then, and you do it in post with editing, the hours of time it's going to take you to create that same effect are countless. And so if you can get someone who knows how to use that and use it appropriately, you're going to save yourself a lot in cost and total man hours. So that's the first thing I would throw up, absolutely. And yes, absolutely. This, music, anything that you want to talk about anytime, please reach out. I'd be more than happy to share more answers with you.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.